We wanted to take a moment here to celebrate Daniel Ellsberg and to pay tribute to what this man has meant to journalism. And we're so fortunate to have with us Rosie Rosenberg, who is Rosenthal. What am I saying? Sorry, Rosenthal, who's the head of the Center for Investigative Reporting, but more importantly, many decades ago was a news assistant at the New York Times who helped work on the Pentagon Papers, and has been a long and loyal friend to Daniel Ellsberg. Rosie, do you want to come up and say a few words?
Can you see me? No. Dan, it's Robert. Hi, Rosenthal.
I know.
Okay. So I did. So anyway, I'm gonna get emotional. So I want to take us all back to June 12th, 1971, Dan, when I first met you. So that was Saturday afternoon. It was a very hot, steamy day in New York. And after months of preparation, the Pentagon Papers was about to go in the first edition of the Sunday New York Times, June 13th, 1971. And this is relevant because Dan did not know that the story was going to be published. And over the last 20 years or so, I've become a very good friend of him, but I had no idea who he was. And that Saturday afternoon at the New York Times was about 3:30, 4 o'clock, what they used to call the Bulldog, the very first edition of the New York Times, which was then printed and sent around the country. And if you were in New York City, you'd get it after you came out of the theater. It would be on the newsstands at 10, 11 at night. It would be the very first edition. And this Times had hired its own security. The building was ringed. They'd set up a secret composing room for the linotype machines, completely separate from the fourth floor where everything was printed usually, to set the type for the Pentagon Papers. Everything had been done in utmost secrecy. I was part of the team as a 22-year-old that was sequestered at the Hilton Hotel for weeks and months. And I actually slept in the room with 2 huge filing cabinets. I slept with the Pentagon Papers. And for months. And I was the kid who had to know where everything was and did everything. And when Neil Sheehan had writer's block at 3 in the morning, I had to walk with him around 56th Street and 6th Avenue because there were a lot of hookers. And the editors were afraid he'd get mugged because he was so distracted and he'd be muttering and talking to himself. And I'd be walking next to him. But that Saturday afternoon, Dan called the New York Times looking for Neil Sheehan because he did not know, because the Times and Sheehan had no contact with him after the day he described when Sheehan copied it from his apartment in Cambridge. And I answered the phone, and I happened to be answering the phone at the foreign desk, which was the command center. And the foreign editor, Jim Greenfield, and another editor, Dick Mooney, were standing there, and I answered the phone. And the tension was incredible because we still thought the feds were going to come in and stop everything if they found out. And the phone rings, and I answer, and I hear his frantic voice on the phone, and he says, "Where's Neil Sheehan? Where's Neil Sheehan? I have to speak to Neil Sheehan." I go, "Who is this?" He goes, "Daniel Ellsberg." And I put my hand over the thing, and I said, "Some guy sounding really nuts." And he needs to talk to Sheehan, and he says his name's Daniel Ellsberg. And the 2 editors went white and backed away from me and went. And one of them whispered and said, "It's the source." And I then knew who had given the Times the Pentagon Papers. I had no idea who he was, but that was how I met Daniel Ellsberg, and I basically said, "Give me your phone number and I'll have Sheehan called," but he never did. He never called Dan. And I think you then ran out and you've written about this and dumped all the pot you had in your apartment and smoked it and hid it because you were afraid the feds were going to come and find the rest of the Pentagon Papers, and he began distributing to all his friends in Cambridge. That's true. Can you hear me?
Well, to Howard Zinn specifically.
Yes, thank you. So that's a true story. So Dan just turned 92. He's announced he's very sick. He's truly an American hero. And one of the most remarkable men any of us could meet. And he doesn't talk about his history. I'm just going to tell you really briefly. He was a piano virtuoso as a young man and pretty much spent the first 16 years of his life playing the piano and was a virtuoso. An accident changed his life in a way. He was a Marine, is a Marine. He was in the Marines in the early 50s. He re-enlisted and went back to the Marines when he thought his platoon might be called to active duty in the Suez Crisis in 1956. He had top secret clearance before he was 30. He helped devise and understood the nuclear war plan of the United States when he was 30 years old during the Kennedy administration. He's one of the strongest anti-nuclear activists in the world. He understands the nuclear threat, and he's truly one of the most remarkable men any of us could meet. And I really recommend that you read his memoir, which is called Secrets, a memoir of Vietnam and the Pentagon Papers, if you really want to understand what it is to be one of the most special men, probably I certainly ever known, and any of us would have the honor to share a room with. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to call Dan my friend, and please say hello to Patricia, his wife, who's also a remarkable partner, and was with him during the whole episode of the Pentagon Papers, and really created a moral compass, I think, for your life. I don't know if you want to talk about that, and he will talk a lot. But his recall is astonishing, and I really recommend you read that book. And all of us, in our work and our lives, if we can emulate his ethics, will improve the world. So thank you.
One thing that we learn from this panel is that we have a lot more work to do as a profession, thinking about protecting whistleblowers and working with whistleblowers, which gave us a thought about how we would love to honor the legacy of Daniel Ellsberg. And for that, I'd like to invite up our former dean, Dean Emeritus Ed Wasserman, another friend of Daniel Ellsberg.
Thank you, David. Pleasure to be back at Logan Symposium. Been coming to these for about 20 years, and I have to congratulate you, David, and your team at IRP. It's good to see Lowell Bergman here, who created the foundation that they're building on, and the Logan brothers, Jonathan, Richard. Thank you very much for your unwavering support. I sort of follow up on Rosie, who basically stole all my thunder, doing a magnificent job. I came into the latter part of Dan Ellsberg's life. I got to know him socially after I became dean in 2013. I met him at a cocktail party, and I was, of course, thrilled. As anybody who got into journalism in the shadow of Watergate and under the influence of the Pentagon Papers, he was a hero. He was, as I've since come to realize as somebody who traffics in the ethics world, he is what we call a moral exemplar. That's somebody who does the right thing not because it's going to accomplish anything, because nobody really has control over consequences anyway. You do it, or comply with some abstract principle. You do the right thing because you have to, because your character compels you to do that. And I think that Daniel didn't know what was going to happen, but he did do the right thing. So I was already a fan when I met him. But I didn't know exactly what to expect. You know, he's a very, very eminent guy. He's on the Mount Rushmore of social activism. He was a game theorist from Harvard. That kind of made me suspect I'd probably run into a certain amount of intellectual arrogance, smugness, and the like. And it being Berkeley didn't help. Instead, he was kind and warm. I think it came through in his talking, the things he had to say today. There's a certain graciousness and a humility about him. And I was totally shocked and surprised and won over. And I was also shocked to find out he had no relationship to the School of Journalism. He lives 2 miles from here. And had virtually no contact with us. And I sort of said, well, you know, does this interest you? And I was amazed and delighted to find out he was very interested in getting involved in school. So we put him to work, and the various ways he started to contribute to the school. And what I remember most fondly is having him come to talk to students at orientation. Now, these are journalism, first-year journalism students. They are young. I mean, the fall of Saigon was like, for our generation, the fall, almost World War I. None of them had heard of Dean Rusk or Robert McNamara. They'd kind of heard, they'd heard of Daniel, but only in a very, very vague way. And so I sort of, this is going to be a hard sell. I couldn't be more wrong. He was captivating. The students absolutely adored him. I invited him to talk for an hour. After that hour, they hung around. They wanted him to talk more. They were buttonholing him. They were making him tell them more. He was inspiring, and they showed him that most precious of commodities among students at Berkeley: respect. So he was a major hit. And I think that what came through, there's certain humility and eloquence. It also came through in his answer to Jim Wheaton's question about the shabby treatment that the New York Times subjected him to. There was no rancor. There was no rancor. And this is something, if anybody wants to catch up on what that treatment consisted of, there's a Mother Jones piece I did a year or two ago that catches up after Neil Sheehan died, and the Times once again misstated, misinterpreted, and minimized his role in the Pentagon Papers. So Dan has done a lot for the school. He was a charter member of our board of advisors, for which we were grateful. We did a lot of things we should be grateful for, but until this moment, we haven't really said it with flowers. We haven't really done anything that really marks and commemorates the kind of contribution he's made to the school and to the rest of us. So hence, in light of his lifelong commitment to truth-telling, the example he has set for the few and the brave, and it was a delight to see a reality winner here. I have to say, I'm so sorry how regretful she is about what she had done. But for the example he set for them, we at the school are creating a lecture series in his name. It will feature whistleblowers. They'll spend a week each here dealing with students, doing public talks, giving classes, and coming to the Logan Symposium. This is intended, obviously, as a continuing commemoration of Dan Ellsberg, but it's also intended as a continuing reminder of the utter indispensability of the people who, like Dan, come forward and risk career and freedom to expose official wrongdoing. These people, these whistleblowers, they are civic benefactors of immense value. Like Dan, they make sacrifices that are all too often ignored, overlooked, and even disparaged by the very media that benefit from the information that they provide to them. After all, the stories that we tell can't be any better than the stories that are told to us. So this lecture series will help ensure that Dan's legacy will be to inspire further generations of courageous people dedicated to accountability, truth-telling, and real public service. So this isn't a pitch for funds. You'll be welcome to give Dan another standing ovation. People may be in touch with you, asking you to dig deep to fund this thing. I'm not sure. We haven't gotten, David and Gita and I haven't gotten together to figure out how we're going to fund this, whether it's an endowment or spend down funds, which will mean something to you for those of you who are in the business of raising money. But we're going to make it happen because it's the right thing to do, and Dan Ellsberg deserves it. So please, perhaps I could ask you to join me for another round of applause for Daniel Ellsberg.
Okay, we'll be back at 3:30. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something? I think he wants to say something. We got to give him the last word for sure. Daniel, do you want to say anything? Yes, you.
I'm speechless. For a little surprise there for anyone who knows me. Not a great characteristic of me. No, I really, I've been hearing these things, not just but from friends who I'm proud to have as friends. And I'm so glad to have been here tonight. I was glad that I was going to be on the panel with Reality Winner because I haven't had the chance to thank her and congratulate her before. So I'm very glad. And the news about the seminar, I've only heard a rumor about that earlier. So that sounds very good to me. I have nothing more to add, and I appreciate very much what I've heard. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see everyone back here.